beginning after the end, Season 1 chapters. Kingry was introduced as a powerful king in another world. Despite his immense power, he felt overwhelming loneliness, staring out the window with no clear purpose in life. Unexpectedly, he died under mysterious circumstances. However, he was reborn as Arthur Lewin, an infant in a world filled with magic and mystical creatures. His mother, Alice, was a kind-hearted woman, while his father, Reynolds, had a childish personality. One day, while strolling with his family, Arthur noticed that people carried weapons and sold potions. He realized that this world was entirely different from the one he once knew. Though unfamiliar with his new reality, he slowly accepted his new identity. While retaining the memories and intelligence from his past life as King Grey, Arthur Lewin continued to live his new life. His parents affectionately called him Art, and he felt proud to see his new face. As he crawled around the house, he entered a room filled with books. There, he began studying the world he now lived in, which was vastly different from his previous one. One of the most fascinating discoveries was magic, a rare ability possessed by only 1 in 100 people. There were 2 common ways to control mana. Augmenters enhanced their bodies using mana, while conjurers channeled mana outside. Realizing this, Arthur began his journey to form and control mana. 2 years passed, and Arthur was still as adorable as ever. Reynolds had slowly started teaching him swordsmanship at an early age, despite Alice's disapproval. Alice and Arthur often visited the town together, and she noticed how fascinated he was with everything he discovered. This made her worry. She feared that one day, Arthur might dream of becoming an adventurer. Her concern grew even more when she saw that sneaking into the library to study had become a habit for him. One day, as Arthur gazed out the window, he saw Reynolds doing something unusual. Observing closely, Arthur realized that his father seemed to be using magic. That moment ignited a deep desire within him to learn magic himself. While Arthur was still looking at his father looked proud of himself. So he decided to show off his skills even more so that Arthur could witness his abilities. As Alice carried Arthur to put him to sleep, Arthur wanted to read more books, but she refused to let him. So, he used his forbidden technique, leaving Alice with no choice but to allow him to read. Arthur then resumed his studies. In 2 years of studying, Arthur was moving 10,000 fragments inside his body to form a mana core. While he was forming the mana, Alice and Reynolds suddenly saw their house explode. The explosion was so powerful that it reached outside, where Reynolds was training. Due to the explosion, Alice suddenly screamed, "Art is still in there!" Reynolds immediately ran toward the house, but unexpectedly, he suddenly fell to his knees, prompting Alice to ask, "What's wrong?" Reynolds replied, "He's not even 3. They were astonished to see Arthur floating in the air. When Arthur finally descended, he was proud of what he had achieved. Only then did he realize that their house was destroyed. Arthur continued his studies, with Alice helping him, especially with learning mana manipulation. Meanwhile, Reynolds assisted him with basic workouts and swordsmanship. Arthur also never forgot to train his mana core. In the end, Reynolds decided that it was time to find a proper mentor for Arthur. While Alice and Reynolds were arguing about what would be best for Arthur, Arthur suggested that it would be better if they both came along to Cyrus City as well. That way, they could also meet his future mentor. With that, they decided to go to Cyrus City. The next day, they made the decision to leave immediately and join the Twin Horns, who were Alice and Reynolds' friends, and were also heading to Cyrus City. This marked the beginning of Arthur's first journey into his new world. When they all met up, Reynolds introduced Arthur to their friends, Adam Crench, spear user, Angela Rose, Wind Magic User, Durden Walker, Earth Magic User, Jasmine Flamesworth, Dual Dagger User, and Helen Shard, Magic Archery User. And so, their journey began. As they continued their journey, they occasionally encountered monsters, which they easily defeated. Reynolds's friends still couldn't believe Arthur's abilities, which seemed like a genius. Because of this, Adam suggested having a little sparring match with Arthur. Even though Arthur refused, Adam forcefully dragged him into it. The sparring match began, and Arthur immediately launched a swift attack. Adam, however, was quick to defend himself. No matter how hard Arthur tried, his body couldn't keep up with what he wanted to do. His body was still that of a child. Still, he gave it his all to land a hit. When Adam attacked, Arthur suddenly recalled Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Adam was shocked by Arthur's movements. After the sparring match, both Adam and Jasmine asked Arthur to teach them his technique and start practicing. Several days passed on their journey to Xyrus City, and they enjoyed each passing day. There was playful banter, and their training continued, especially Jasmine's training in Arthur's technique, which she easily followed. As they traveled and chatted, Arthur suddenly felt worried about Alice, sensing that she seemed weak. A few hours later, their carriage suddenly came to a stop. At the same time, Jasmine shouted, "Bandits! Prepare to engage!" Angela immediately cast a protective spell, shielding them just in time from the surprise attack of the bandits surrounding them. And the leader showed up, who's so ugly. Arthur remembered that every world had its own share of filth, just like him. His expression changed, and Alice immediately hugged him, thinking he was just scared. The battle continued between both sides. Durden used an earth wall, while Angela focused on protecting their carriage. Everyone fought and defended themselves in their own way, as they were completely surrounded. However, they still watched each other's backs against surprise attacks. Attacks flew left and right, an endless fight. As the battle raged on, Arthur quietly observed with Alice by his side. Suddenly, Reynolds crashed into their carriage, injured. Arthur quickly asked his mother to heal his father, but was confused as to why Alice wasn't doing it. Then, Reynolds spoke to Arthur, telling him to take Alice and leave. Arthur hesitated, insisting that he could fight. But Reynolds looked at him firmly and said, "I know you can fight. That's why I'm entrusting your mother to you. Protect her." And because of what Reynolds said, Arthur realized that Alice was pregnant. This gave him the determination to protect her as they escaped. However, their escape wouldn't be easy, as they were up against enemy with 4 mages and long-range attackers. As they fled, Adam helped by attacking those pursuing them. But the enemies continued their relentless assault with long-range attacks. Arthur quickly defended against them, but in doing so, his wooden sword broke, shocking their opponent of what he sees. Arthur sensed that something was wrong. There were supposed to be 4 enemy mages, but he could only see 3. He began searching for the missing one when he suddenly heard something from their leader. Turning around, he spotted the 4th mage, who had already cast a powerful spell, preparing to strike. The attack was inevitable. Arthur knew that even if he dodged it with mana, his mother wouldn't be able to. So without hesitation, he pushed Alice away and took the hit himself. Even as the attack struck, Arthur was determined to take the mage down with him. The 2 of them were left hanging off the edge of a cliff before they both fell. Jordan immediately tried to save Arthur, but it was too late. Arthur fell into the abyss, regret filling his heart, because he had always dreamed of becoming an older brother. While recalling his past life as King Grey, he entered one of the council chambers. There, he saw images of his past achievements before he became king. Then, he handed over his medal to retire. Being the strongest was meaningless if all of his cherished people were gone. He was willing to give up everything just to return to Ashbur and see them again. Meanwhile, in the present, Arthur lay weak beside the corpse of the mage who had fallen with him. Beside him, he noticed a bag and ate one of its contents due to his hunger and weakness. When he woke up again, now with enough strength to rise, he took a knife that was embedded in the mage and examined the place where they had crashed. Even though he had no idea where he was, he still started his journey, until a voice suddenly spoke, startling him. When Arthur heard the voice, he immediately thought of the dead mage and wondered if he was still alive. To make sure, he tried poking the body with a stick. He then looked around to see where the voice had come from and asked who it was and if it had saved him from falling. The voice responded, confirming that it had rescued him, but he would only learn its identity once he arrived at her place. The voice also promised to help Arthur return home. Upon hearing this, Arthur immediately thought of his parents and didn't hesitate to follow the voice's instructions. It was then that he realized the voice belonged to a woman. The mysterious voice revealed her location and suggested that Arthur leave immediately so he could travel safely while the sun was still up. Despite the many questions swirling in his mind, Arthur began his journey toward where the voice resided. Along the way, he came across a river and took the opportunity to clean himself. Though he still felt uneasy about the forest, he was determined to get home, not wanting Alice to worry about his disappearance, especially since it might affect the child. Eventually, Arthur reached the place where the voice resided. Seeing a root on a rock, he shook it, thinking it was the source of the voice. The voice then spoke again, telling him that he would see her within the crevice. Without hesitation, Arthur entered. As Arthur stepped inside, he suddenly fell again, this time into the place where the voice resided. When he looked up, he finally saw the source of the voice. However, he was shocked and terrified by what he saw, causing him to stumble backward. In front of him sat a figure clad in metal armor. The armored person immediately approached Arthur. Arthur, frozen in fear, had his mouth slightly open in shock. But as the armored figure reached out a hand, it turned out that they only wanted to help him up. The figure then offered Arthur some edible plants that would help nourish his body. Arthur quickly thanked her and took some. As he picked the fruit, he thought about his parents, only to be startled by the armored figure again. While eating, Arthur asked what he should call her. The figure introduced herself as Sylvia. As they talked, Arthur gradually felt his fear fade away. Curious, Arthur asked, "Where is this place? Why are you here all alone? Where did you come from? How did you get that wound? And why did you save me?" Sylvia answered that they were in the middle of the Beast Glades and the forest of Elshire. She also revealed that Arthur was the first person to ever enter that place. Arthur then suggested that she call him Art, since that was what his parents called him. Continuing to answer his questions, Sylvia explained that she was alone because she had no one to be with and had many enemies. Her most recent battle was the reason for her wound. She then suddenly returned to her seat and reassured Arthur that his parents and friends were still alive, so he shouldn't worry. Hearing this, Arthur felt a wave of relief wash over him and sincerely thanked Sylvia. While Sylvia continued to build the portal that would help Arthur return home, they would sometimes talk during breaks. Hours, days, and weeks passed, and they spent every moment in each other's company. Though Sylvia never shared much about her past, Arthur gradually got to know her better. She was the embodiment of "don't judge a book by its cover." Despite her intimidating, almost terrifying appearance, she was kind, gentle, patient, and warm, reminding Arthur of his mother, Alice, who would scold him whenever he made mistakes. Then, a sudden memory of the bandit he wanted to hunt down resurfaced in Arthur's mind. But before he could dwell on it, Sylvia flicked her finger at his forehead, startling him. She then told him that if misfortune ever came his way again, he must not let grief and rage corrode his mind. As Arthur continued eating, he noticed that Sylvia's wounds were become bigger. Then, Sylvia suddenly asked him, "How have you formed your mana core more efficiently than a full-fledged mage?" Arthur simply replied, "My family said I'm a genius." Sylvia pondered for a moment and thought, perhaps he will be able to learn it. Absorbing mana while moving. With that, she began teaching Arthur. He trained diligently, and after much effort, he finally succeeded. But when he turned around to share his success with Sylvia, he saw her lying face down on the ground. Arthur immediately ran to Sylvia to check on her. He saw that her wounds had worsened, and when he glanced at the portal, a terrible thought crossed his mind. Perhaps her condition had deteriorated because she had been creating the portal for him. Guilt washed over him, and he blamed himself for her suffering. Sensing his distress, Sylvia reassured him, telling him it was fine. But Arthur, tears streaming down his face like a child, cried out, "How can it be fine when you're dying because of me?" Sylvia tried to calm him down, reminding him that they had no time to waste as she pressed against her deep wound. Even as Arthur continued blaming himself, Sylvia told him that he was actually doing her a favor, helping her leave that forsaken cave sooner. Suddenly, her form shifted, revealing her true self, a magnificent dragon. This was the last time she would ever show her real form to him. Sylvia hurried to complete the portal. Without the veil that had once hidden her presence, her enemies would soon find her. As the portal finally opened, she handed Arthur a vibrantly colored egg and a feather before engraving an ancient code onto his hand. Just then, the cave trembled as rocks began to collapse, and a figure clad in armor, similar to Sylvia's, emerged from the darkness. In a final act, Sylvia stopped time and confessed to Arthur that she had intentionally delayed the portal's completion just so she could spend more time with him. She then made a request, asking Arthur to call her grandma. Arthur desperately wanted her to come with him through the portal, but before he could react, Sylvia pushed him into it. As the portal slowly closed, Arthur cried out, "Grandma!" Hearing this, Sylvia smiled warmly and, with her final moment, whispered, "Thank you, my child." After Arthur emerged from the portal, the realization hit him. There was no chance of ever seeing Sylvia again. Overcome with regret, he let out a loud, anguished scream. Memories of the 4 months they had spent together flooded his mind. Sylvia had treated him as if they were blood-related, teaching him so much. Just then, Arthur was startled by a voice in his mind. For a moment, he thought Sylvia was with him, but he quickly realized it was a message she had left for him before he entered the portal. He remained silent, listening intently. In her message, Sylvia explained that he was still too young and not strong enough to know the whole truth. So, she had infused her will into him, something that would aid his development as a mage. How useful it would be depended entirely on how he chose to wield her gift. She also reminded him to take care of what she had left behind for him. Sylvia revealed that once Arthur reached the white stage, he would hear her voice again, and she would explain everything when the time was right. Then, in her final words, she bid him farewell. Not as Arthur Lewin, but as King Grey. Arthur was stunned. Did Sylvia know all along about his past life? This revelation left him deep in thought, but he knew he had no choice but to move forward. Determined, he set off on his journey once more. As he leaped from tree to tree like a monkey, his sharp eyes caught sight of a carriage in the distance. Curious, he approached, and to his shock, he discovered that it belonged to slave traders. And also, they had captured an elf. Arthur continued to follow the slave traders, hoping that the forest hound might help him escape the forest. He also decided to take down the slave traders to let off some steam. Despite his eagerness, he knew he needed a plan. Attacking all four of them at once would be suicide, even for him. So, he kept following them, waiting for the right moment while gathering his strength in the forest. When Arthur finally saw an opportunity, he made his move. Since he had no weapon, he used a technique he had learned in his previous life. While one of the men was busy feeding the hounds, Arthur swiftly attacked and killed him. He then took the man's weapon, while the hounds feasted on the corpse. The fat man grew impatient and went to check on his companion. But Arthur was already waiting for him and immediately launched an attack. However, there were still two more left, and dealing with them together would be difficult. As Arthur hid, the bald man noticed him and quickly attacked. Luckily, Arthur managed to dodge and landed a decisive blow, taking him down. However, the bald man let out a scream, alerting his remaining companion, Longhair. The bald man warned Longhair that Arthur was a mage, and Longhair immediately attacked. Arthur dodged the attack and countered, hitting Longhair in the face. Longhair retaliated, landing a strike to Arthur's stomach, causing him to collapse. Grabbing Arthur by the leg and suspending him in the air, Longhair thought he had won. But Arthur quickly came up with a plan, and he struck Longhair from behind, dealing a fatal blow. After finishing off the slave traders, Arthur checked the carriage and rescued the young elf inside. After Arthur rescued the elf, he immediately bid farewell, intending to leave. However, the elf stopped him, afraid of being left alone. Arthur tried to explain that he also needed to return home. He reminded her that she was an elf and should be used to the forest, but she still refused to be left behind. Seeing no other choice, Arthur decided to accompany her home. He searched the carriage for supplies they could use on their journey, and freed the hounds. He also hoped that once they reached the elves, they might help him find a way back home. When he returned, he gave the elf some clothes, and she gratefully thanked him. As they traveled together, Arthur got to know her better. Her name was Tessia. They exchanged stories, with Arthur explaining how he ended up in the forest. He also asked what it was like living in Elenoir, and Tessia happily shared her experiences. While they were enjoying their conversation, Tessia suddenly asked what had happened to the bad guys. Arthur assured her that she would never see them again, which made her feel relieved. When midnight arrived, Arthur set up a tent and told Tessia to rest while he stood guard outside. However, Tessia felt scared inside the tent and insisted that Arthur stay with her. Understanding her fear, Arthur agreed and stayed inside to help her feel at ease. Arthur and Tessia continued their journey, but Arthur couldn't stop thinking about his family and his strong desire to return home. However, one of the biggest struggles he faced was the unbearable, agonizing pain from his manacore, which struck unpredictably. At times, Tessia would ask if he was okay, but he always responded with, "I'm fine." Every night the pain tormented him, making it nearly impossible to sleep, which puzzled Tessia. Sometimes he would hide behind trees to make sure she wouldn't see his suffering and worry about him. As days passed, Tessia also started to weaken from the journey. Seeing this, Arthur helped carry her belongings. Meanwhile, the pain continued to torment him, and it became harder for him to hide his suffering from Tessia. After spending so much time together, Tessia wanted to call him Art, just like his family did. Arthur allowed it, appreciating the familiarity. Finally, they arrived at the place where the portal that would help Tessia return home was located. When Tessia returned home using the portal, Arthur was stunned and amazed by what he saw. Suddenly, a group of guards arrived and greeted Tessia as the royal princess, shocking Arthur even more. As one of the guards spoke, Tessia's parents arrived: Alduin Erilith, King of Elenoir, Marial Erilith, Queen of Elenoir, and Varian Erilith, the former king. They were overjoyed to see Tessia again. Arthur gently pushed Tessia forward so she could reunite with her loved ones. Seeing their emotional reunion, Arthur couldn't help but wonder if his parents would react the same way when he finally returned home. King Alduin immediately expressed his gratitude to Arthur and wanted to know what had happened. Arthur respectfully responded, "I'm honored." Before he could say more, Tessia eagerly pulled him along, excited to show him more of her home. Once they entered the kingdom, Queen Marial instructed the maids, "Our guest needs to freshen up. Please get him washed up and prepare a room for him to rest." However, Arthur insisted on explaining what they had been through first. During the gathering, Arthur properly introduced himself, impressing the king. He then recounted their journey, though he only shared a half-truth, avoiding any mention of Sylvia. He explained how he had encountered the slave traders who had kidnapped Tessia. However, one of the guards doubted Arthur's story and was about to object when Varian stopped him. Regardless of their skepticism, the most important thing was that Tessia had safely returned home. Arthur could only hope that, someday, he would also return to his family in Sapin. Tessia was surprised when she heard Arthur speak, and her family found it strange. Arthur quickly explained that, according to history, humans were not allowed to stay in their kingdom. His priority was to ensure his family's safety and let them know he was still alive. The king then spoke, saying that regardless of the past between the two kingdoms, Arthur had saved their daughter and even took the trouble to accompany her back. That act alone entitled him to a fitting reward. Moreover, the portal was only accessible once every 7 years during the summit conference of the three races. It would take another 5 years before the gate could be opened again, but they were willing to send guards to escort Arthur home safely. The king then told Arthur to make himself at home while they prepared his escort for the following day. Arthur expressed his gratitude immediately. Upon reaching his room, Arthur cleaned himself up, but suddenly, the pain he was feeling returned. Tessia soon visited him and head-butted his stomach in frustration. She was upset that Arthur had spoken so coldly to her family earlier and was already planning to leave so soon. Arthur quickly explained that he was only being respectful when speaking to the king and queen, especially since Tessia hadn't mentioned her parents to him before. Tessia refused to let Arthur leave right away, insisting that she was his first friend. So, Arthur asked Tessia to accompany him as he explored her homeland. While they were happily wandering around, they were suddenly attacked. Arthur swiftly blocked the attack, only to be shocked when he realized it was Varian. Impressed by Arthur's movements, Varian became convinced that Arthur was the one who had defeated the slave traders. Since it had been a long time since Varian had encountered someone interesting, he challenged Arthur to a fight and handed him a wooden sword. As soon as Arthur grabbed the sword, he immediately attacked Varian, shocking Tessia. Varian could only mutter, "Scary little brat." Arthur attacked again, but Varian suddenly disappeared and reappeared behind him, aiming a strike at the back of Arthur's neck. However, Arthur managed to defend himself just in time. When Varian closed in and struck him with his elbow, Arthur was hit and forced backward. Their battle continued, both relentlessly attacking each other. When Arthur saw an opening, he took the chance and managed to land a hit on Varian's forehead. Varian was stunned, unable to believe that Arthur had actually landed a strike on him. Just as Varian was about to request a second round, Tessia pinched him. She told him he should have gone easy on Arthur. Varian scoffed, saying, "If I go easy on him, I might be the one getting bullied instead." Hearing this, Arthur smirked and said, "I'm honored." However, Varian's expression suddenly changed. Without hesitation, he told Arthur to become his disciple. Arthur was taken aback and hesitated. Since he was human, he wondered if it was even allowed for him to stay in this kingdom. Varian confidently replied, "No one would dare try to kick you out if you're under my tutelage." However, Arthur refused. He still didn't know what had happened to his parents, whether they know if he was alive or dead. Understanding this, Varian came up with a way for Arthur to contact his parents. One of the reasons Varian didn't want Arthur to leave yet was that he knew Arthur was struggling to control his beast will. When a beast is powerful enough, classified as Class A or higher, it gains the ability to pass on its will or inherited abilities. Varian didn't even bother asking how Arthur obtained such a power. Varian then revealed that he was a beast tamer. He warned Arthur that if he didn't learn to control his beast will, his body could suffer from the inside out, potentially leading to his demise. While Arthur was asleep, a monster appeared in his dream, pressing down on his body. Then suddenly, Tisha greeted him with a "good morning," sitting on his stomach. Arthur called her a shadow monster, which annoyed Tisha. She then asked Arthur if it was true that he would be staying in their land. Arthur replied that it depended on his plans with Varian that day. He teasingly called her princess, which made Tisha even more irritated. Arthur then suggested that she should leave because he will take a shower to get ready. Unless, of course, Tisha wanted to watch, he joked. This made Tisha exclaim, "How perverted." As Arthur made his way down the stairs, he overheard a conversation between the king, the queen, and Varian. They were discussing whether Varian should allow Arthur to stay in their kingdom, even though it was against their tradition. Varian responded by saying that he had taken a liking to the brat and that Tisha had also approved of his decision. The king wanted to say more, but Varian cut him off, assuring him that he would personally guide Arthur and ensure that everyone in the kingdom acknowledged it. Hearing this, Arthur couldn't help but smile. While riding in the carriage, Varian shared Tessia's experiences with Arthur. As the only princess, she grew up in a lonely environment. Many adults and children pretended to be her friends, only to end up hurting her. Because of this, she became distant and cold. However, Varian was happy that thanks to Arthur, Tessia was now happier than she had ever been before. He sincerely thanked Arthur for this. When they arrived at the place of Varian's mysterious friend, Varian immediately kicked the door and shouted for the person to come out. As soon as she stepped outside, Varian introduced her as Rinia. Once inside, Arthur wasted no time and asked for her help in communicating with his family. Rienia, known as the Diviner, recognized that Arthur was special. So special, in fact, that there were parts of him she couldn't see. but her eyes have seen pieces of both past and future of Arthur. Since they had a specific purpose for coming, she quickly handed Arthur a basin of water so they could begin. Using the water in the basin, Arthur could see and communicate with his parents. To make it work, he had to focus on every detail about his parents to see them clearly, and they can hear his voice. While Alice was preparing food with Reynolds, sorrow was evident on their faces, especially since the dish she was cooking was Arthur and Reynolds' favorite. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice echoed in their minds. Arthur said, "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. It's me, your son, Arthur. You're probably really surprised that you're hearing my voice inside your head, huh? I'll explain all that later, but for now, I just want you to know that I'm alive and safe. I managed to survive the fall off the cliff, just barely. This should be a secret, but I'm currently staying in the kingdom of Elenoir with the elves. I know it must have been hard. It's been hard for me too, but I'm glad you're both okay. I hope you guys don't blame each other for what happened. I'm proud of what I did back then, and if I could go back in time, I'd do it again, even if it meant I would die. I wish I could go to you guys, but that might be a little hard right now. It seems I have a sort of illness that I need to get treated. I'm not in any danger, but I need to get treated before I head back home. I'm not sure when the next time I can reach out like this will be. There's a mage here that's a deviant like you, Mom. She's the one allowing you guys to hear my voice. Dad, I keep practicing magic and fighting while I'm here recovering. Don't be surprised if I can beat you in a match the next time we meet. Until then, keep Mom and the baby safe. Mom, Dad, I love you both. Take care until I get back. When Arthur returned to the kingdom, the king and queen stopped him before he could enter, wanting to speak with him first. They wished to apologize for the things they had said before leaving their kingdom with Virion. Additionally, King Alduin acknowledged Arthur as his daughter's savior and as his father's disciple. Tessia then interrupted, suggesting that if they were truly sorry, they should let Arthur explore and enjoy the city. Without hesitation, they changed into casual clothes and began roaming around the city, happily exploring. While they were walking, a young elf boy named Faerith suddenly bumped into Arthur. Faerith wanted to mess with him and tried to belittle him, but Arthur ignored him and instead played along with his antics. As Arthur and Tessia were about to leave, Faerith suddenly challenged him to a duel. Tessia immediately intervened, scolding Faerith for daring to challenge the disciple of Elder Virion. However, despite knowing Arthur's status, Faerith was still determined to fight. Arthur accepted the duel, and many elves gathered to watch. As soon as the fight started, Faerith launched his attack, but in an instant, Arthur appeared right in front of him and landed a punch that knocked him down. Even though Tessia already knew how the duel would end, she quickly grabbed Arthur's hand and ran away, laughing. They continued their walk around the city, enjoying the moment. Arthur cherished the day because, the next day, his training with Virion would begin. Season 1 end. Please like and subscribe for more chapters.